Hi, my name is Gijs Homan. Within Quintiq, I'm Solution Director of Business Unit Metals and Manufacturing. And within manufacturing, of course, we also handle our protein and meat clients. So within my 16 years of supply chain experience now, I also encountered quite a lot of meat companies. And I would like to tell you a bit about the industry as such. I think that there are three main root causes for that. And the biggest one, of course, is global population is increasing, meaning that there are more mouths to feed, which results in additional animals needed to be consumed. But also in the more established economies like the US and Europe, there is also the incremental trend that we see for the coming years, and that's mainly due to the fact of urbanization, so local access to more supply, so to say, and restaurants and people going to restaurants and the behavior that comes along with it. And the third one, I would say, is the rising economies, so countries like China and the region of Northern Africa. There you see a large increase because these economies are picking up, and although meat comes relatively cheap, it's still seen as a more luxury commodity to consume. And these regions are now picking up, and typically you also see that from a species perspective. So the poultry market in particularly is going to grow rapidly in the coming years. But also for other species, so the red meats, and the only species that's a bit behind on the prognosis for the coming years is then pork, and that's mainly due to the angle of the more conscious behavior of consumers to eat more healthy and or to skip a meat meal or become vegetarian for a part-time or part of the week, and even the number of full-time vegetarians are increasing. That also has to do with on the global scale with global warming and carbon footprint, and the carbon footprint contribution of the meat industry is very significant. So up to 15% of the total footprint is caused by the land that's needed for the animals, but also the methane that they produce, the woods that will be cut down because they need a place to reside. So all in all, that's certainly a big environmental impact as well, and people, of course, nowadays are more conscious about what should happen with the planet as a whole for the future. From a meat producer perspective, there are a lot of challenges. So what makes the chain really interesting is, next to the variance in demand that goes for many industries, there's also, of course, a variance in supply. So once an animal gets to the abattoir, and the dimensions that you actually get and the properties of the animal itself can be variant to a lot of different specifications. Meaning that you not only have to cope with a short-term variance in your demand, because the retailer is demanding something, it's nice weather out there, so you start putting on the barbecue and you need some meat for that. And then, of course, you go to the convenience store and it should be there. But other than that, it's also whatever part of the animal they get in through the front door, so to say. So if there's a large deviation between those short-term demands and the supply that they will get on the day itself, it's an endless game of a balancing act. What to cut out of which animal, meaning that that's partly season-driven, but also driven by consumer behavior. And of course, there are some trends for the longer term, and there are some trends for the shorter term. And as the industry is mainly driven by retail, so the retailer really dictates what's being sold, and they're quite strict on service level agreements to those retailers. The balancing act of how to cut up a carcass, what will be available for other parts of the market, and what will end up in the convenience store is a day-to-day challenge and a balancing act that they need to do. So, for instance, carcass optimization. You have multiple ways to cut a carcass into end products. Selling part of it to restaurant chains, selling part of it to the traded channel, and or to sell it directly to the retailer. But it also means that if you sell all the good cuts, you end up with some rest meats that you also need to take care of and to somehow get to the market. Some of them might be more profitable, some of them might be less profitable, some of them might take a lot of effort, some might take minor effort, but in the end it's a day-to-day balancing act on how to complete this exact picture. So one of the key challenges and one of the key insights that any meat producer needs is to be able to have transparency and visibility of the end-to-end supply chain. Meaning that starts with doing decent planning. So the moment your demand is volatile and your supply has a high variance, you could say, well, planning is of no use because it will differ in the end anyway. But being prepared for these scenarios and for these possible futures is of course a value add at the moment that you are even 60 or 70% right, that you only have to focus on the remaining 30 to 40% during the day of execution. And also within the day of execution, by having this visibility and having this transparency, you can make agile decisions. So the moment your demand changes within the day, take it that a promotion at the retailer goes really well, so you get an additional order in and quantities can double or triple even within the day, you can still reply to that, whether you can deliver, and if you can't, buy when you can. But also you can enable your sales force. So if you have the visibility of which parts of the carcass are already sold, you also know the remaining parts which are still available to the market. And your sales force can then really dedicate its time on selling those parts which will be available, guaranteed, getting better prices. Adding to that the constraints of the freshness, and then of course for the smaller species like poultry, we're talking about maybe 3 to 4 days of shelf life for which it needs to be at the convenience stores. While for red meats it's a bit longer, of course, but still freshness is key to the industry and everyone would like to get its meat as fresh as possible. Adding that constraint to the already difficult operations they are in, visibility is really key, and being able to assess every planning decision going forward is then a very important factor. When we talk about key performance indicators, it should relate to the plan for the future. So KPIs no longer relate to what was established in the past, but looking forward to what you're going to establish. Particularly KPIs in the planning environment would focus around SLAs, for instance, so service level agreements with the retailer. If you have a contract in place that you need to deliver at least 99.5% of the ordered volume, you would like to know whether you made that target, yes or no. Other KPI could be the amount of temp labor that you're using with your current plan within the factory, because large part of the abattoir is staffed by fixed labor. But due to these peaks and spikes, you also need temp labor typically, meaning that you would like to have insights on that because you can cut costs directly if you can save on the temporary labor force. Other key KPIs could be the number of supplements that you use. So which materials do you need to purchase from external companies to do your balancing act of supply and demand. Or even the total profit margin that you make on a single carcass. So really from a profit perspective, do we have the most profitable share of our carcass sold and to which companies? So it can start very simple, from basic KPIs to very advanced, full-blown profit optimization for the industry. And of course, all these KPIs are reflected in real time for every planning decision that you take within the application. Yes, I can give some customer examples where Quintiq contributed to the company's success. And although we're talking about the protein and or the meat industry, I think there's still a large difference between which type of species you are indeed handling. So for instance, if you look at poultry, quite small animals with short shelf life and very high volume, so we're talking millions of chickens a week typically. There the complexity is not necessarily in how to disassemble those chickens, because yes, they do come in variants of weight and specification. Then again, the number of options you've got to cut them into pieces is quite limited. So from a disassembly point of view, it's not that complex. But if you look at the shelf life and the amount of time that you are granted to do actual material assignment, because it's a very short cycle, makes it challenging in the poultry industry. So with Quintiq, you can get that visibility even on the shortest lead time to be able to assign those materials to your end demand, and demand can even vary within the day. So within the day you make decisions of how to assign your demand to material supply. Also coping for the fact that you need to pre-produce in some cases, or you need to take particular customer constraints into account, or you have cut-off times of certain transports because they need to leave to be on time, on site at the end customer. But also what you typically see in the poultry industry is a siloed approach between the further processing and the abattoir, meaning that the slaughtering operations are facilitated in plant A, while further processing, so make it into a ready-to-eat meal, roasted chicken, nuggets or drumsticks, which are pre-grilled, takes place in a different facility, meaning that you have transport in between within the day, but also you deliver to the same end customers. So taking a siloed approach from these two facilities would mean that you can't respond that agile. And even if you can in one of the silos, the impact on the other part of your operations wouldn't be visible. And making sure that operations run smoothly and they get to the highest service levels as needed and demanded by their key customers, being the retailers. So within the poultry industry, it's all about being agile. And then if you look at pork processors, they got different challenges, because in the pork industry, it is about the disassembly. So pork carcasses are quite big. They have a high variance in specifications. So fat layers, for instance, on the hams are quite important. And how are you gonna match that supply with your actual demand, and down which processing lane are you gonna cut up the animal, and which parts are you gonna cut out, or which parts are you gonna leave intact? Meaning that the whole disassembly puzzle and the optimization puzzle, every cut that you make should add value to the end product. And also giving transparency on which cuts are then still available and non-spoken for, and which are already sold and spoken for to your sales force is part of that disassembly puzzle. And the number of cuts that you can make simplifies the puzzle a lot, because it really blows up the number of options that you do have. And also from a manual perspective, the planner has to do that material assignment manually on, let's say, tens of thousands of animals every day. You're exceeding the lead time that you have to create such a plan. So it's very important to get the proper system support in place for that. That optimization can be beneficial to you because you get a solution within a given time frame, and still keep into control for when reality kicks in and you really need to make changes in a manual way, still being in time to fulfill the service level agreements with the retailers as such. Well, beef is quite close to pork, I would say. So although it's a completely different species and completely different animal, from that perspective, operations are quite like for like. Of course, you in the beef industry got the dry aged meats, meaning that the shelf life on those is a bit longer, and you got dedicated lead time for the meat to mature. But what's similar to pork is that you got all these cutting options, and typically what's done is that the primal cuts, so let's take the primal steaks, for instance, are easily sold off. But that means that you also are left over with all the other meats which are not that easy to sell. So if you, for instance, on a daily or weekly basis can make an overview of what's already sold and what's still to be addressed and to be sold, that can be very profitable for you, and deviate a bit from the spot market and being able to promise orders already to customers for the best prices out there still. Then you can make more profit out of the same cut. But also you can enable again your sales force to sell off whatever is non-spoken for. And at the same time, you're solving your balancing act of supply and demand by assigning the actual demands already to the supplies upfront. Meaning that by doing the same, but now with a plan in place, you can be more profitable and being able to make the right decisions of which material you assign to which demand. What's in it for the meat companies is added complexity as well, meaning that what I stated before about visibility and transparency, currently they're dealing with retail stores where they get a single demand, probably by depot or maybe even by convenience store, but certainly not by consumer. And if you look at home delivery, then it gets more and more tailored to the end consumer, meaning that the definition of big data really blows up. So you need to consolidate that and also take care of all these individual demands. And then also a service level kind of get more strict, meaning that if you order something online for your barbecue tomorrow, you surely want to have it delivered exactly as ordered. And if you go to the convenience store and the burgers are not there, probably you'll go with sausages. So it complicates it a lot. And the moment you can't react in a very agile way and are able to confirm these orders, for instance, and accept these orders, but also deliver them on time, which is typically outsourced to third parties. But still you do have strict cutoff times of the cold chain when meat leaves the depot and needs to be ready from production. So adding all these complexities kind of makes it, well, I wouldn't say impossible, but at least a challenge for meat companies to produce to these kind of demands. Meaning that without the right visibility from their planning department and getting the right plans in place, for sure they can't handle and or cope with these complexities in the future going onwards. And then a spreadsheet is not going to hack it. Meaning that you will need optimization or automation at least, and you will need this insight and you will need the capability to handle big data. And with a planning solution, of course, a first step would be that you actually can handle this complexity. Well, it's important that you don't plan in silos. So whatever operations you are planning, if they are dependent on each other, you should plan them as a whole, or at least have the impact of operation A on operation B. So you can make decisions cross-chain. And that can end, for instance, or start at the farm and end with logistics to the retail customer. But also there you see more and more integration of the cycles as a whole. And where a planning system then can be of aid is being able to plan the whole supply chain end to end, from your raw material to your end product to end customers, taking all constraints and lead times into account. And constraints and lead times can be from transportation costs, to production costs, to labor costs, to raw material purchasing costs, and any value add you do within the operations and capacity that you have available. So again, throwing all these variables in the equation makes it quite complex, and it starts with visibility before you can add value to any existing and or new plan for the future.